Yo, every hip-hop head remembers the tragic and untimely death of Mac Miller. But how many people actually know more from him than Blue Slide Park? It seems like everybody heard Frick Park Market, but pretty much stopped following the artist afterward. That's what a lot of people did, while still others only started paying attention when Watching Movies with the Sound Off dropped, and he had features from Earl Sweatshirt on his tracks. We can't sit around and think about Miller in those terms, because then we don't have a complete image of him as a person. Mac was complex. His story was multifaceted. Instead of doing this, we're gonna dig into Mac Miller's life as he actually was, and what we discover might be shocking. Mac had an incredibly tragic life, although a lot of it was justified for a while. Mac was born in Pittsburgh back in 1992 with the birth name of Malcolm James McCormick. While he played a lot of sports in school, it was apparent pretty much immediately that this wasn't where his passions lie. He was never quite focused in school. Instead, he lived most of his life at home, lost in the world of music. He learned his way around the piano, the guitar, drums, and bass by the time he was about 6 years old, on at least a decent level. When he was about 15, he decided he was going to teach himself how to rap. He had grown up on acts like the Beastie Boys and Sugar Hill Gang as a kid, so it only made sense that this is where he would end up going. In an interview with a local newspaper when he was 18, he spoke on this decision, saying, "Once I hit 15, I got real serious about it and it changed my life completely. I used to be into sports, play all the sports, go to all the high school parties, but once I found hip-hop is almost like a job, that's all I did." At first, he went by Easy Mac, later cementing his moniker as Mac Miller after the release of his first mixtape, But My Mackin' Ain't Easy, in 2007. After a couple of years, he had put out 2 more mixtapes called The Jukebox, Prelude to Class Clown, and The High Life. Shortly after this, Mac Miller started work on what was gonna be his first major mixtape called KIDS. Around the same time, Mac met Wiz Khalifa and Wiz's manager, helping his career immensely since both of them took an interest. At this point in his music, Mac was just a carefree kid, and the lyrical themes in his mixtape will really show that. He didn't party like other kids. He loved making music, and that was all the fun he needed. This is a big contrast to how his life would go later. In 2010, after the release of KIDS, he was touring heavy and doing his best to get as many hits as possible on social media, since he wasn't really making music that was going to get airplay in Pittsburgh. Despite this, he was popular enough to make it to a spot on the XXL freshman list in 2011, beside the likes of Kendrick Lamar and Meek Mill. That same year, he would drop Best Day Ever, a mixtape that would finally make him a big name in the scene. His single, Donald Trump, hit the Billboard Hot 100 chart, peaking at number 75. Now that he finally had some clout, when Blue Slide Park dropped later that year, it was a huge deal. Fans commented frequently on the nostalgic, close-to-home feel of the album. One fan on Twitter said, "Glad I listened to your album first. I don't know how to explain it, but it made me happy, like in a nostalgic way. But it's all new. I don't know. Love you, dude." In fact, an independently released album hadn't debuted at the top of the Billboard Hot 200 since Dog Food dropped in '95. 3 songs from the album charted, but critics weren't super into it due to the fact that tons of people wrote Mac off as another Asher Roth. Just a young kid writing music about partying yet again, right? The album hit gold, but it didn't receive near the same amount of praise as his work would later on. After this, Mac got himself involved in a few different adventures. Instead of just putting out a follow-up, he released Macadelic, a mixtape with a decidedly psychedelic turn. In addition to this project, he also dropped You Under an Alias, an album full of jazz instrumentals featuring his vocals. There was also a planned collab album with Pharrell Williams, but it didn't actually pan out. Around the time he started touring for Macadelic, Miller somehow ended up getting into codeine promethazine syrup, known on the streets as lean. It's how he learned to cope with the stress of being on the road constantly. Although he started getting into it pretty much right after the release of Blue Slide Park, it really hit heavy around this time, pretty much changing the public perception of his character into a mind addled by dependence on substances. It was a dark path that he would only be able to shake for fleeting moments moving forward. He developed an addiction for a while, although he kicked it by the time he starred in a reality series on MTV2. This would be enough for the time, but syrup became too thick, taking hold and eventually engulfing him entirely. He also put out Run-On Sentences, Volume 1, and appeared on The Way with Ariana Grande, his ex-girlfriend, around this time. This track peaked at number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 and went triple platinum. Although we saw hints of it with the release of Macadelic, we moved into a whole different phase of his career. Before, Mac's talk of substances and drinking were mostly just from the point of view of someone who was young, new to the experience, and having a good time. Moving forward, the lyrics would grow increasingly introspective as he started to realize he had a legitimate problem. Watching Movies with the Sound Off was released in 2013, got rave reviews from critics. His features were increasingly far out and further from the mainstream at the time. Even early into his career, he was spitting prophetic lines like, "These eloquent, irrelevant sentences show my penmanship. Indefinite boundaries show you the end of it. He and I are not the same. Doctor, please prescribe me something for the pain." After that, he dropped a mixtape called Stolen Youth with rapper Vince Staples, which delved further into the themes of addiction he had talked about on his previous record. He had never been quiet about his substance use, but it really hit a new high during this period. Mac was open about being messed up every day. For a while, during the release of the album Goddamn in 2015, he was noticeably doing a ton better. As he said, life goes on, days get brighter. He's also quoted as saying he'd rather be a frat rapper than someone who never leaves the house. It seems that instead of stewing in his depression and isolating himself, he was able to make the best of things. He hung out with Ariana almost constantly and released another album called The Divine Feminine in 2016. He had been switching up music styles and genres constantly on these projects, further cementing his reputation as a legitimate artist. Not only that, but the lyrical content on The Divine Feminine was widely praised by critics for being a well thought out and genuine depiction of romantic love. In 2017, there was nothing new coming out for Mac, but things were great. Mac and Ariana were deeply in love, and he took some time to himself to spend by her side. That is until 2018, when they broke up. There were other stressors involved before this happened, to be straight up about it. An arena Ariana was performing in was bombed in a radical attack in 2017, surely shaking the both of them beyond belief, right? And this is without taking Mac's substance abuse into account, which only served to make things worse. 2 weeks after the breakup, he crashed his car and received a DUI. He claimed that it had nothing to do with the breakup and that he had made a mistake, but it would make sense if it was him sinking back into his depression. To add insult to literal injury, his ex, Ariana Grande, started an incredibly public relationship with comedian Pete Davidson, famous for his stand-up and Saturday Night Live performances. For Mac, this was a lot, especially since they announced their engagement shortly after. He sunk deeper and deeper beneath the water, into a downward spiral, discarded by the one he loved most. When pressed about it, Grande claimed it was about busy schedules, but also said she didn't want to be a babysitter. Oh, that shit gotta hurt. And after that, in August of 2018, he released his final album, entitled Swimming. The title of the album itself hints at the grim details of Mac's life in the years before its release. He was drowning in lean and depression, treading water to keep himself afloat. This album would feature some of his most intimate lyrics, delving mostly into the topics of heartbreak, regret, and his own mental illness. It was his 5th album to debut on the charts, and once again, the critics loved it. In interviews, Mac explained that for him, the important part of making music was that fans could get something positive out of the listening experience, relating and growing through the struggle. He was shocked to know people cared, saying in an interview, "It's incredible that some of these kids will look up to me." A month after the album dropped, at age 26, Mac Miller was found unresponsive at his apartment. It became apparent shortly afterward that he had suffered an overdose and had passed away, just as he was about to embark on a tour in support of his new album. He'd been kind and open-hearted with his fans near the release, thanking them on Twitter for their support, saying, thank you so very much. I appreciate you and am glad you are enjoying. Love you and yours. Whether you like Mac or you dropped off after you heard Frick Park Market, there's no denying that the world lost an incredible artist that day. Mac constantly showed the world how much someone who just considered himself a high school rapper in the early days could do. Mac grew and failed and stumbled and succeeded, constantly changing with his whims and where he thought he could take his art. He was a deeply troubled person, but he used that as fuel for growth when he could have just stagnated. Although the end was tragic and it happened way too soon, Mac left us with music we can revisit today and appreciate for what it represented. Mac could have been so much more if he was only allowed to cope with whatever it was that had him in such a depressive funk as this fame grew. But we shouldn't be pessimistic about it. We should look back at the art he left us, cherish it, and know that the happy class clown who grew up in Pittsburgh would be happy to know that we're still talking about him today. So what's your favorite Mac Miller project? Which line hits you the hardest? Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, keep it Rizzle.